Behind me are the elements of what you call
Ay,
professional
sana.
education component of the licensure exam for teachers.
Sara
If you
ko.
have watched the Gen Ed components, you better watch this one. Because behind me actually are notes that I created so that you can be guided on the table of specification and you can have your own checklist if you have learned enough and if you are preparing enough for the licensure exam for teachers. So for you to do that, you have to subscribe to my channel, which is right here in this video. Good day, everyone. In this video, I'll give you a glimpse of the professional
sarap
education
talaga.
major component of the licensure exam for teachers. I will break it down into 4 major categories. You know, it's a big 150 item test, and I'll break it down into percentage of distribution based on the TOS earlier known to the Board of Professional Teachers and released to the public as a reference to those who would like to study up close and personal, even go to the details of the preparation for the licensure exam for teachers. I will, of course, not relate it much yet to the PPST or the professional, the Philippine Professional Standards for Teachers, because I'll do that in the next or succeeding episodes. Right here, the PPST as the new guide to the standards
Maganda kasi ito,
of
pang presko,
being a
dun sa bata.
professional teacher in the Philippines.
nadurog
All
na
right,
siya.
I'll talk about that in
Tama na yung
future
stock siguro, no?
episodes. But I'd like to remind you that connected to this episode is an earlier episode about the general education. I reminded you that while Gen Ed is only 20% if you belong to the secondary education, okay, and 40% if you belong to the elementary education group. All right. However,
Maganda rin yun kasi
you
baka
cannot neglect the
malaki
fact
yung maibigay na
that
tapos
the
susunod,
general
babalik sila, maliit na.
education is a test that
Sabihin,
will determine what's
binabasa na
right
si Kuya.
here so that you will not pour from an empty cup. The thing is, general education content are so general that they are presumed to be, to be found among all teachers that they would give the privilege to become a professional teacher. But you know, the Prof Ed is different. The Prof Ed is trying to make you prove to the board and to the state and to the society and the schools that would hire you in the future, even in front of the classroom, that you know how to be a teacher inside and outside the classroom, all right? Local or global in perspective, you know, as a teacher, as a person, as a member of that society. That is the coverage of the professional education. By the way, if you have not subscribed to this channel yet, you better subscribe because a lot of things will happen in this channel and you will miss it if you don't. Okay, have you subscribed? Better do right now.
Bakit hindi ba
Okay, let's talk about the distribution just to remind you, just to make it visual to you, that if you belong to the secondary education, of course, don't forget that you will be tested 60%, okay, for professional education. Okay, that's why. If you don't make it in Prof Ed, goodbye. Okay, but if you, that's for elementary, I mean. But if you, of course, belong to the secondary, of course, you have 40% for professional education, another 40% for your majorship, and 20% for general education. Okay, but you know, I will always say, I will always advise that you should be walking on 2 legs if you are in an elementary education. Okay, but you have to walk on 3 legs
kaya yung kambing gawing ganito?
if you belong to the secondary education. All right, let me break it down therefore. If I will break down professional education, okay, professional education, I would like to remind you that there is a story on how you can keep to mind
Sarap yung sabawin
the
eh. Walang
content of
langsa
the
yun eh.
Prof Ed. It's like this. The board exam is testing whether or not you are competent. And that competence is
May kambing doon, marami doon eh.
tested in those items that they will put in that exam. All right. And in Prof Ed, you have to prove that you know how to teach. In Gen Ed, you have to prove that you know what to teach. Also in majorship, you have to prove that you know what to deliver inside a classroom. But the Prof Ed will really test whether you can teach and you understand your role as a teacher, not only in the classroom, but also in the society where you live in. And that's why this is very, very important. And you listen very well. For the meantime, right in this corner, I will write the 4 areas of the professional education and will show you how it's divided to 20%, okay, to 35%, all right, to another 20%, and to 25%. Okay, I structured it this way because a mind map will always be a nice, a nice visual tool so that you can see the entire picture, the big picture of it. Now, first and foremost, the 20% belongs to that part of the test which will determine if you really understand the teaching profession.
Ha?
Okay. The teaching profession. All right, now that the licensure exam for teachers, in history, it used to be with the civil service because then this was called the PBEP. Now it's brought back to the PRC. It's brought to the PRC so that it's professionalized, the professionalization of teachers. And that's why you have to prove that you understand teaching as a profession. As a profession, you have to remember that if you have a license, you don't have a right. As you're given the license, you are only given a privilege. And that's why you have accountability, you have liability. You have administrative liability, you can lose your license.
Hindi ko sa
You can
pinagalang
have,
kahapon kasi
civil
na, baka
liability,
may
you can
papasok ng
pay
Saudi.
fines
Bahuan.
and damages. Or you can even have criminal liability and you can actually go to jail. And that's why
Paglabas ko pa
the
naman,
role of the teacher being
ko
a
alam kung sino nagbukas pinto
professional
doon
is not
sa-
only limited in the classroom but also in the society, in the larger society where you live in. That's why part of the 20% is also the social dimension. Okay, the social dimension of teaching. Your role in the society, in the bigger world, in the global context. And of course, part of this 20% will be your field studies and your practice teaching. It will determine if you had been there, if you have done that. Okay, now, for the biggest chunk of professional education, this will test if you really know how to become a teacher inside the classroom. And the first thing you have to prove, to be able to prove that is you understand curriculum development.
Di
Okay?
kaya
Because
government.
you don't only teach what you want to teach because you're governed by a curriculum, the sum total of all the learning experiences of a child
Siguro na.
under your care, under your guidance.
Upahan siguro na, no?
Right. If you understand the curriculum, then maybe you can go to the next level, which is instruction. And which is why, in this 35%,
Marami pang
a major part of
walang
this
pa eh.
will be the principles of
Mahal ng
teaching.
gulay doon.
Okay?
Saging
It will
7 kilo,
determine
7
if
per
you
kilo.
know the principles of teaching. Okay? Can you really teach? Do you understand how to teach? Are you equipped enough with the theories on the principles of teaching? Are you governed by the science and art of teaching? Okay, and then, of course, 35%, because it's teaching, then the educational technology will come in, the EdTech. All right, in the past, in the olden past, the teacher only had to prove that she has the content competencies. Then later on, as we grow the science and art of teaching, the teachers are now demanded to show the pedagogical competence. But in the context of the current times, the fourth industrial revolution, the context of the new normal as spelled by this pandemic, comes another competency, and that's the technological competencies. That's why don't forget TPAC, the technological competencies, the pedagogical competencies, and the content competencies. The TPAC model, I bet, in this upcoming board exam, there's going to be a lot of questions on EdTech.
Tama
Do you know
rin,
how to
Sim.
use Zoom? Do you know how to use social media in teaching and learning? Can you really manage the learning
Asim nga,
management
asim.
system? Do you understand really the languages being used by children when they navigate the computer space? Would you know how to understand connectivity? Would you know how to make a video? Okay, would you have a good judgment to curate available resources in the Google and so on? Can you navigate using tools, not only in teaching, but also in assessment? Would you know how to make this full use of the Google Classroom, the Google Docs, the Google Form, and all of these other technology that are available with us right now? Are you familiar with Schoology? Okay, are you familiar with some resources that will be available? Do you know the meaning of blended learning, flexible learning? Do you exactly know what these terminologies mean? And do you consider the fact
Wala
that
to sa amin eh.
your your learners are on the other side
Yung
of
paklay sa
that
amin, paklay.
virtual space where
Sabi
socialization
nila.
is not limited to the face-to-face only. And believe me, this is gonna be the future of education. And that's why
Ganun din
EdTech
sa
will
amin.
become very, very strong in this upcoming board exam, and you have to prove that you are familiar with all of this. If ever you want to experience this,
Hindi ka
you
napaluto
have to
ng-
go to CBRC, because in the case of CBRC, we have developed our omni-model performance management system. It's our learning management system that
Pero
we design
hanap-hanapin din kasi
ourselves
yung luto
for
sa amin talaga
purposes of the review. And of
Hanap-hanapin
course,
mo eh.
part of this teaching process will be reading. Okay, that's why developmental reading becomes a major component of this. Okay, because as you understand that reading is a major tool in teaching and learning experience. All right. Now, let's go back before I go to the third part. Of course, you want to understand teaching as a profession. You want to understand your role as a teacher. It's not only being in the classroom, but being part of a society. Okay, after that, you enter into the classroom, but you're not alone. You're guided by the curriculum. You have to understand the principles of teaching and learning, of course. You should be able to use this technology, and you should be able to use the capacity of the child, so that the child becomes the center of your teaching learning experience. And after that, at 20%, you have to understand that it's not about teaching, but it's about learning. But under the concept of the outcomes-based education, where the teacher is not anymore the sage in the stage, but the guide by the side. The teacher is not only the content provider, okay, but rather facilitator of learning. And that's why 20% goes to facilitating learning. Facilitating learning.
Sinong
Okay,
Jess?
here is where you become a facilitator. But for you to be able to really facilitate learning, you have to understand the child.
Kano yun eh?
Okay, and you have to understand the adolescent in case you belong to the secondary education. And that's why child and adolescent development. Okay, what are their needs? What are specific to preschoolers? What are specific characteristic of
Kaso yung
a toddler, of a
Ilocano,
young adolescent,
hindi malinis ng luto.
of an 18-year-old child.
Sila Bade? Sila Byron?
That you encounter every day. You have to understand that. And last but not the
Yun
least,
daw,
is the
sabi nga eh.
25%. And the 25% comes to what is one of the most important role you
Magluto
have
nga
to
sila
play,
ng
and
munggo,
that is
hindi
to
nga nila
determine
hugasan
if
ng munggo eh.
indeed learning took place. And that can only be true when the teacher understands assessment. And that's why assessment, together with your field studies,
Wala
your
nang- wala
practice
nang salita
teaching,
na-
will occupy
Byron eh.
25% of the
Byron, Lani.
I repeat, before I
Pangalan
move
isa,
to the
bukas-bukas ang mukha.
specifics of all of these 4 divisions, you have to understand that teaching as a profession, what it takes to become a professional, what are your responsibilities, the continuing professional development, and so on. That's a social dimension, so that you can position yourself in the bigger
Lagi
society.
nang away ang asawa niya.
Then you are guided by the curriculum, and you're
Iloilo
trying
yung asawa
to
niya.
execute the teaching, learning principles that you can learn from past theories and so on. And then you use technology,
Pira.
and you take advantage of that knowledge that you have of reading. And as a facilitator of
Sabi ko
learner,
sa
you
kanya,
have to put the child in the center of
magkasusunod ang
everything.
asawa niya, kahit anong
But you
bilhin
have to
niya sa
understand
gamit
the
ng mga
child
bata,
and the adolescent.
mga
And
branded pa
lastly,
daw.
if you are sure that your child, that
So,
the
bata pa
learners
kasi yan,
have
hindi mo
learned,
pwedeng
then you have to
bilhin
prove
mo
it.
ng branded yan, kasi ilang
Not
buwan
just
lang,
by
hindi na naman
intuition,
masusuot
but
yan.
by science itself. Because
Kasi
teaching is
masikip
both a
naman eh.
science and an art. And
Yung
there is
maganda
an
lang
art
din
and
na
a
hindi din
science of
branded.
assessment and evaluation.
Hindi din yung pangit.
Okay, and now we will take a look at this, and I'll go
Pangalan
to the
nun, kalimutan ko.
specifics. Are you now
Judel.
ready to go to the details
Judel.
of the professional education components in the licensure exam for teachers? If your answer is yes, better promise me that you will subscribe to this channel. And better yet, after watching this, you have to refer this to your friends so that they too can benefit from this little discussion. Earlier, we have broken down the entire prof-ed into 4. Okay, as you may see, teaching profession, curriculum, principles of teaching, facilitating learning, and assessment. My intention is to make sure that it is well discussed in terms of the details. The first one is the teaching profession. Of course, the second one will be curriculum development, etc. The other one is the facilitating learning, etc. And the last one right here is the assessment, etc. Okay, the teaching profession, as I told you earlier, centers on the teacher. Do you really know how to become a teacher? Do you have what it takes to become a teacher? Do you know the standards? These are the words. Do you know the standards? And such standards is not limited to what you can actually deliver as you are as an examinee. But there is a concept of the personal
Sabi,
and
lumabog ko si
professional
kanina.
growth and development. Okay, don't forget that. Now the
Yung
teachers will
pagkalas mo
have the
ibig, sabi
role.
mo. Kalas.
Okay, you
Kalata
have the
kubos.
roles.
Mo
You
kalas hina.
have the
La, hina kater takir.
responsibilities. Okay, and such roles and responsibility
Sabi daw,
is both in
ada
the
tol model
local
kalam.
and the global
Mungkin ada model G,
settings.
mungkin
You
ada
have
model G,
to
mungkin ada model
remember
G.
that. And the
Kit,
teacher
tari.
is,
Ala,
don't
badin
forget,
takir.
the change agent.
Pagano daw, nag
All right, and because the
Kiramdaman
teacher
lang
is
daw
the
sila kung
change
anong bibili.
agent,
Eh,
that
matagal.
teacher, we have to look into the historical.
Sala sa baba.
Okay, you have to look into the socio-economical.
Diyan
We
na
have
pumunta
to
doon.
look into the social-psychological.
Linis siya ng
Okay,
sasakyan.
we have to look into environmental and geographical. Okay, we have to look into all of these factors that affect the teacher being, a change agent and being a facilitator of learning.
Yung mga taga-Sinti,
All right,
malapit
here
taga...
also is where
Ano
the
kanina?
pillars of learning is
Yung lang saya.
being tested.
Yung
Okay, the
payat na,
pillars. The
malapit
learning to know, learning to be, learning to do, learning to live together, and the
Papunta
last
doon,
one is the
umpisa
learning to
na dyan.
change,
24
learning
yata
to
eh,
transform.
73.
Okay? Now, aside from these, you have to
papunta
understand
doon
that in this
Kwarto niya, no?
composition, 20%, this is where ethics and accountability is discussed. Okay, do you know the accountabilities? Do you know the laws that govern the teachers? Do you know the implication of you using
Bigyan mo sa amin.
corporal punishment to children? Do you know all of those? All right. So that's for the teaching profession. Okay, as a major component, right here, taking 20% of your test together with social dimension of teaching. Okay, now let's go to curriculum development, which is not alone, as you can see here, curriculum development, principles of teaching, EdTech, and development reading. Okay, let's talk about that. Because this is curriculum and development, instruction, all of those, of course, classroom management. Okay, will be the major focus of this, classroom management. Do you know in classroom management, just remember the 3 C's, the content, okay, of course, the conduct. You have to understand the conduct and the context of the discipline right there, the consistency that you have to maintain in that environment. But classroom management also refers not only to discipline, but refers to activities. What activities will you engage in the classroom so that learning can take place? The methods. Okay, the methods that you will use in managing the classroom, the materials that you will need in that classroom. Of course, all are called resources. Okay, resources in the classroom. Of course, curriculum. Okay, the sum total of all the learning experience of the child, the lesson planning. Okay, and that's why this is where you will encounter the questions related to goals, objectives, all of those, the resources, the strategies of teaching and learning. This is where it will fall in. Of course, in terms of technology, they want to know if you can actually prepare and use. Okay, prepare and use this technology as a conventional, non-conventional, traditional, or alternative, okay, technology so that you can teach more effectively. All right, this is where the big word of instruction will be tested. Do you really know how to teach? Okay, it will be tested right here. And the roles of all the stakeholders. Don't forget that you're not alone in the teaching learning process. You have to take it from the perspective of other stakeholders. Okay, stakeholders are the PTCA, the parents, the teachers, the community, and the society where the child lives in. Therefore, if you want to determine the magic word of this portion, which takes 35% of all the tests, you have to remember the magic word, which is outcome. Okay, the magic word is the outcome. Okay, who's the outcome of education? It's the learner. What they can demonstrate, that change. The magic word of outcome is the change. Okay, and that outcome was the objective earlier. In the lesson plan, you can see there the objective. But after you teach, then you have to observe the child, what change took place, and that's the outcome. And this is where the 21st century competencies will be discussed. This is where you will be tested if you understand the 21st century skills. Can you teach creativity? Can you teach critical thinking? Can you teach metacognition? Can you facilitate a classroom where a child is not only learning how to memorize and to read and to understand, but the child will know how to actually think above thinking, which is metacognition. And that's why this is 35% of all the tests. Imagine classroom management, the big words outcome, the big words curriculum, the lesson planning, the goals, the outcome, the resources, the teaching strategies will come in. Okay, the technology, can you prepare the technology? Are you familiar with the use of the technology? Are they conventional? Are they non-conventional? Are they traditional? Or are there alternative technology that you're using? Instruction, the stakeholders. Do you understand the role of the PTCA, for example, in general? In the local government setting, of course, your mayor would have some role in the educational system, of the educational council. And of course, right here, all right, 25% belongs to assessment. Let's talk about it. Assessment. Now, if you speak of the word assessment, I'm sure you know that assessment will come to you in 3 different big words. Is it a traditional one? Is it a traditional assessment like the paper and pencil test? Is it an alternative assessment? Is it an alternative assessment like your portfolio? All right, like performance, like the projects that you ask the students to do. And of course, the authentic. Okay, did you ask them to make a garden in their little backyard and check it later on as an authentic assessment of what they have learned? Do you understand the result of assessments? Okay, what happened to the results of the assessment? Do you understand the data, the data? Do you know how to process this data? And as you process the data, what do? You record and you report. All right, the thing is, why do you report and why do you record the process data or information that you gather in the assessment? Because you want to improve. That's the magic word. The teacher is so passionate to do assessment because she wants to improve the performance of the student. That's why the alternative assessment would have not only the portfolio, the collection of all the artifacts to prove learning, you would also look into performance. Okay? Now, because the purpose of that processing of that data, the recording and the reporting of those information and data or data is to improve the performance of the child. Do you know how to use the different techniques and tools in assessment? Okay, do you actually know that? You have to prove it. And do you know how to give a grade? Do you understand when to record it and when not to record it? How to give the grades, how to give the mark, okay? And all of these factors related to assessment. And last but not the least, of course, we're talking about 20%, which is facilitating learning. This is where learning will be the magic word. Learning. Okay. Do you understand the factors that affect learning, like cognitive? This is where you will be tested if you understand IQ, the metacognitive. Okay? All right. This is where you have to also understand what is the motivation of the child into learning. How do you actually motivate learning? The sociocultural. How do you engage the sociocultural factors of learning? Okay. And this is where the theories of learning will come in. This is where researches will come in. And to tell you, and to be very specific about it, take note of this. This talks about the art of teaching. In this part is the science of teaching. Why? Because the theories and the researches will guide the teacher into the learning and understanding of the development of that child. And this is where the science will come in. That's why this is where the biology of learning will come in. The biological factors, the linguistic factors. Okay, the linguistic factors like the mother tongue based, multilingual. education. Why are we using the mother tongue-based multilingual education for kinder to grade 3? Okay, that's part of this portion where the theories of learning and development will prove that if you are efficient enough to teach a child in using the mother tongue-based multilingual education, then you are able to teach the child how to think using the mother tongue and then learn English to use it for communication purposes. And lastly, you have to remember that this is where the discussion of learning environment will come in. Okay, the learning environment, the physical environment, the virtual space. This is where you talk about the needs of the child. If you really want to be an outcome-based teacher, an outcome-based educator, you have to put the child in the center of it. And in this portion of learning, you will be able to customize the learning experience that will be specific to the needs of that particular child. Respecting individuality, respecting gender, respecting, socio-cultural differences and factors, the emotional condition of the child being part of this learning and development. Because this is not only biological, this is not only linguistic, this can also be social, this can also be emotional, this can also be psychological. Because at the end of the day, learning is not about IQ, it's about EQ, it's about AQ, it's about DQ. The big DQ comes into the picture now. DQ is digital intelligence. Okay, with this discussion, I hope that I'm able to provide you some guide. If you can replay this video and get a sheet of paper and take note of all those elements that I mentioned, I have been reviewing for the licensure exam for teachers for the longest time, for more than a decade. For 14 long years of CBRC, we have been offering the teachers board exam. I've met all sorts of students, from the top-notchers down to the repeaters and to the multiple takers. And you know what? What they fail to realize is why the board exam is being given. The board exam is being given so that you can prove once and for all that you have what it takes to become a teacher. And Prof Ed is given a premium, a big chunk in the licensure exam for teachers. You know why? Because this will be your opportunity to prove that you know how to become a teacher. You know, why you become a teacher. Okay, the big why of becoming a teacher. The professional in you, the person in you as part of the society. Don't miss that. You're part of the society. Then the moment you enter into the classroom, you have to manage it. You have to understand the curriculum. You have to come in the classroom with a lesson plan, with clear outcome, with activities and methods and materials and all resources so aligned and synchronized, including technology, so that your instruction becomes effective and can deliver the outcome. Then you'll be guided by the science of teaching and learning. You acknowledge that learning is affected by cognitive, metacognitive, motivation, and sociocultural factors, and that there are theories and researches that will back you up into the discovery of the teaching and learning and the development of the child from the biological standpoint, linguistic, cognitive, social, emotional, psychological. And mind you, you put the child in that learning environment where you as a teacher is part of, where classmates are actually they're part of. And this is where, the learning will take place in its highest level of science. And after you have proven that you know how to teach and you have taught enough, then here comes assessment. And in assessment, you have to prove that the child really learned. And whether you're using traditional, alternative, or authentic assessment, whether you're using central tendencies, the mean median mode, whether you're developing a test, okay, can you really develop a test? Do you know the difference between difficulty index and the discrimination index? Do you know the standard deviation? Do you know variance and all those languages you think of? Because this is where the data are being processed, not only for you to record and report, but with the love to improve the performance of the child. And of course, you will have tools and techniques so that finally you can evaluate and give a grade. That's the challenge of Prof Ed. And no wonder A lot of people will fail in prof ed. Why? Because they are just so good to know what they need to know, but they are not very effective in becoming the best teacher they can be. In the next part of this video, in the next episode, I will talk to you about the latest, the PPST, the Philippine Professional Standards for Teachers. I'll talk about the domains. I'll talk about the strands. I'll get you into the mind and to the brain of those who are developing the test. Because those who are developing the licensure exam for teachers, every test item that they make is anchored on something. It's anchored on the standards, because the standards are the bare minimum where you will be tested for your competencies, and the questions being asked in the board are the performance indicators of those competencies. At the end of the day, to become a teacher to be a licensed professional teacher is to be given the privilege, and the state, the government should make sure that you don't only know what to teach, but you know how to teach, and you know everything around it. God bless you, teachers. Keep on learning. Don't stop learning, and please share this video to your. This video will deepen your appreciation of the preparation you're making to pass a licensure examination. You know, they say that when the why is big, the how is going to be easy. When the why is big enough, the how is going to be easy. Many people are preparing for the boards and are finding it very difficult. Many have been through a lot of preparations but end up not successful in their preparation. It's not because they don't know how, but they don't appreciate why. And in this video, I will deepen that perspective. I will shift your preparation for the board exam not only on how you will do it, but on why you will do it. Because there is always a danger that a lot of people and a lot of review centers are just so focused on making you familiar with the questions that would appear in the board exam, most likely to appear in the board exam. And then because you're familiar with the question, you're familiar with the right answer. That's going to be wrong. It will be wrong because you will be reviewing to the test. You should be reviewing to become the professionals you are and to become the best person you can be. Remember this. You are like applying to join a community of professionals. And the key for you to be able to enter the door is for you to prove that you have what it takes to become a professional. And that's why you have to understand, why are the regulatory bodies appointed by the government? That is so that they can make sure that those people whom they will give the privilege to become professional will be there serving the public, and the public is safe from that service. And that's why without that license, you cannot practice the profession. Let's put it this way. Okay. Let's illustrate it this way. Okay. Because you want to be a professional, you need to perform a role. And by becoming a professional, you will assume a role. If you're a teacher, you have a role in the classroom. If you're a nurse, you have a role in the hospital. If you're a doctor, you have a role in the hospital, in the clinics. If you're an engineer, you have the role in construction, in building, in finding solutions. And together with that role comes the responsibility. And this is why, once you are given the license, you are not given the right to practice the role. You are given the privilege to practice the role because you have the responsibility, and the state, the country, the government has the responsibility to protect its people. And as a professional, you have a responsibility to prove that you are a safe nurse, you're a safe doctor, you're a safe professional at that. Okay, and therefore, they establish what you call standards. Okay? The standards are minimum basis of performance. Expect that when you are given the standards, you can always go higher than the standards, but you cannot be lower than that standards. The standards will actually promote the practice. It will guide the professionals, okay? And the standards will also direct the professionals, okay, and the public. the academe, what do you teach? You teach the standards. Okay, the public, what do you expect from these professionals that they're able to perform it based on the standards? Even the board examiners, they will use the standards. Do you have at least the minimum capacity to perform that role and perform that responsibility? And which is why the board exam will be very keen at seeing your competencies. Okay, they would look into your competencies. You're being tested for the competencies. You're not being tested for your recall. You're not being tested for your memory. You're being tested for your competencies. And when you speak of competencies, you speak of the knowledge, the attitude, the skills, and the habits. Okay, that's why expect that in the board exam, you will not only be tested on your cognitive ability, you will not be only tested on your skills or your psychomotor ability, you will also be tested for your attitude, which is your affective abilities, including the habits that you may have that would affect your performance of actions. And therefore, if the competencies are there, competencies are just written things that would determine if you're capable of performing it. But you have to demonstrate that. And that's why there are things like indicators of performance. Okay, there should be indicators of performance. You should be able to prove it. Prove it to me. You're a good nurse? Prove it to me. You're a good doctor? Prove it to me. And as a person looking at you as a professional, I should be looking at the indicators of your performance. Okay, and that's why in the board exam, the core competencies are determined. The core competencies are connected to the standards. And the core competencies are demonstrated in the person's indicators of performance so that these core competencies will give you the ability to perform the responsibility and the role as you are as professionals. I repeat, it is very, very dangerous if you are only preparing for the board exam and getting familiar with the questions that you're being asked. That will be very dangerous. Don't forget that responsibility sounds like accountability, and accountability sounds like losing your license, paying penalties, or even going to jail. And you don't want to put yourself in a situation that all you can do is to pass a test. When you are able to pass the test, make sure that you have the right competencies to demonstrate the standard so that you can perform your responsibilities and the roles. In this portion, I will discuss what you call the table of specification. The table of specification refers to the reference of the board in writing those questions that will be given to you in the licensure examination for teachers. Teachers know very well that the TOS identifies what should be asked, and the TOS becomes the outline, becomes the checklist, and the table of specification also becomes the basis for the construction of a test so that the complete test will measure what you intend to measure. It becomes a valid test, it becomes a reliable test. Now, the general education is very critical for teachers for the elementary. Okay, for the elementary teachers, don't forget that all right, about 60% of your test will actually come from professional education. Okay, 60% of the test will come from your ability to answer professional education questions. And don't forget that 40% would come from general education. And this is for the elementary teachers. But for the secondary teachers, of course, you have the third component of the test. You would have your majorship. And the division of the test will be something like this. Something like this. Okay. 40% will be your professional education. All right? And another 40% goes to your majorship or your specialization. And general education takes the 20%. right? So that is your professional education. This is your majorship or your specialization. And this is now your general education. Okay. You have to make sure that you are prepared in all these areas. Otherwise, you are in danger of losing your investment on, I mean, if you are a specialist, if you are a secondary education major, and you're so good with math, but you neglect your English, then this 20% will pull you down. Or if you know how to perform mathematical operations but wouldn't know how to teach it, and you lack the pedagogy to teach mathematics, then you would suffer from the 40% that would come from professional education. Now, for general education, I want to start with the general education, and you have to watch the next video, which is on professional education. For the specialization, there's a lot, and that's why you might as well just refer to the books that I have written. Okay. Now, for general education, okay, you will break down the general education into four parts. I'm sorry, six parts. Okay. The first part is English. The second part will be Filipino. The third part is mathematics. Don't worry, we will go to the specifics of all these subject areas. Then after mathematics, you will talk about sciences. Okay? And of course, you wouldn't miss social sciences. And even prior to the pandemic, there was already a very high regard for ICT. Okay, so these are the six areas of general education that you may want to actually master and understand. Okay, now let's begin with English. You would notice that as a teacher, there's a very high regard for your ability to communicate because Filipino and English will contain a very high percentage. In fact, English takes 25%. Sorry, English takes, yes, 25%. Think about it. So if you're poor with English, you already lose 25%. So you can just catch up with 75% of all the rest. Okay? Now, if English takes 25%, Filipino takes 15%. So if you're weak in these two language areas, you can just imagine you're already losing, what, 40% of your test. All right, and mathematics, because mathematics is not just like being familiar with this mathematical procedure, but mathematics is actually what? It is actually critical thinking. It's problem solving, and it takes 20%. All right, we'll focus on this side first. Okay, with English, there's an importance given to the use of English. Okay, such use of English is taking a chunk into what they're testing you for. And when you speak of use, of course, you want to understand if you can actually write, you can speak English. As a teacher, you will be tested on whether you can use English, okay, in the way you think, in the way you write, the way you read, the way you speak. Okay, because basically this is about communication. Are you able to comprehend? Your comprehension will be tested. Your ability to detect the mood of a line. You'll be given a line and you'll be asked, what is the mood? The subject-verb agreement, the is versus the was, the are and the where, and so on. Now, writing in the discipline will also be tested. You'll be tested on your linguistics. The difference between semantics, syntax, pragmatics, these will all be tested. The style, stylistics, the rhetorical devices. Remember those words like the assonance, the alliteration, and so on. Figures of speech. They're very, very keen as whether can the really teachers use figure speech. The difference between simile, metaphor, the hyperbole, personification, and so on. In academic writing, you will also be tested if you can identify errors in the academic writing, spelling, the modifiers, the parallelism, the use of comma, the use of semicolon, the use of the period. There are so many ways by which the board can check if you can evaluate academic writing. Now, with speech and oral communication, you'll be tested for your grammar, parts of speech. The use of in, on, at, that will be tested. Vocabulary words. How many new words have you learned every day so that you're preparing yourselves for the board exam? Don't just be familiar with those questions or those words that were asked before. You have to really enrich your vocabulary, not only for the test, but for your experience as a teacher. Of course, part of this speech and oral communication is communication processes itself. Do you understand the role of the sender and the receiver, the encoding, the decoding, the message, the feedback, all of these elements? Do you really understand these channels, the language, the paralanguage, the verbal versus nonverbal? You will be tested for this. And aside from this, in English, you will be tested for literature. You'll be tested for literature. And literature, you should be familiar with Filipino famous writers. Like, do you know Nick Joaquin? And do you know the influence of that Hispanic influence to him? The Jose Garcia. Okay, you want to find that out. You have to be familiar with them. The famous writings like, who wrote Biyag ni Lamang? These are all related to this, the literature. And the types of literature. What is a prose? What is a poetry? What are all of these? How are they different from each other? In English, you will be tested for this. And which is why you have 25% of the test expected to come from your ability to use English in communication and the depth of your knowledge in literature. And lastly, in English also, you have to learn the works of the masters. The works of the masters. Okay, the works of the masters. Of course, you have to be familiar with the epics, the collection of fables, the famous writers, for example, the William Shakespeare, the Edgar Allan Poe, and of course, the pen names. What's the pen name of Mark Twain? All of those. So it's not about the teleserye you're watching now. It's not about the Korean novela you're watching now. It's about how familiar have you been in the course of your study to understand the works of the world masters, the literature, and your ability to communicate. That's for English. After English, let's talk about the 15% component which is coming from Filipino. Siyempre, pasok na pasok dyan ang wika, ang panitikan, at ang masining na pamamahayag. Masining na pamamahayag.
Napak mong sa'yo.
Alright. Sa usapang wika, hindi dito mawawala yung katangian ng wika, antas ng wika, ang variety ng wika, at maging ang teorya na pinagmukala ng mga wika. Hindi mawawala yon. Sa panitika naman, siyempre, hindi mawawala ang mga manunulat, ang ama ng Ilocanong panitikan. Siyempre, alam niyo yon, dapat alam niyo kung sino siya. Ang sagisag ng panulat, ang Francisco Baltazar. Okay, ang balagtas, ang balagtasan. Okay, dapat kilala nyo ang tikbalang at kung ano-ano pa. At sa pag-usapan namang masining na pamamahayag, siyempre ang bahagi ng pananaliksik at ang nagagamit ng mga husay ng Pilipino sa pagbuo ng isang sulating pananaliksik or research at that. Okay, siyempre exciting of them all will be mathematics. Ang laki rin ng porsyento ng mathematics. Siyempre, ang mathematics, we will start with the fundamentals of math. The fundamentals of math. Okay. Siyempre, itetest dito kung naaalala niyo pa ang PEMDAS, the PEMDAS. Okay, it will be tested. Dito papasok yung mga concepts of divisibility rules,
Ito na talaga nakita si...
the LCM, the GCF, okay, the measurement of units and units of measure, the perimeter, area, volume, all of those, capacity, weight, conversion from metric system to other systems, convert units, importante yon, and even the operations of whole numbers, fractions, prime, composite,
King yan.
denominate numbers, etc. Hindi
Si King
mawawala
kaya
yun.
o siya talaga?
Siyempre, papasok dyan ang plane geometry.
Kasi hindi naman alam ni King kung anong pinagagawa niya, di ba?
Alright. Siyempre, pag pinag-usapan ng plane geometry, the lines, the curves, perpendicular, parallel lines, angles, angle proportion, special triangles, the quadrilaterals, the polygons, and siyempre problem solving using geometry. Okay. Siyempre, papasok din dito, hindi mawawala ang elementary algebra.
Sinibak talaga.
Okay, the simple algebraic operation, hindi mawawala ang polynomials, linear expressions, linear inequalities. You will solve, evaluate, manipulate even the symbolic and numerical problems that will be given in algebra. At syempre, pasok din dito, and part of it will be research, statistics, and probability. Don't be surprised if you find here computations of mean, median, mode, which you don't only find in Prof Ed, but it may also be found in the discussion of statistics. Okay, after mathematics, of course, you will be tested for your ability to teach or ability to be a content provider for sciences. So, syempre, science nga takes around 20%. Okay? And that's why we have it here. Now, science, syempre, papasok dyan ang biological sciences. Okay. In biological sciences, syempre, papasok ang introduction to biology, papasok dyan ang genetics. Naintindihan mo ba siya? Okay, papasok dyan ang cell. Of course, cell, papasok na yung lahat ng levels of the cell biology, the microbiology. Okay? The parts of the cell, the microbiology, the theory of the microorganisms. Papasok ang evolution. Hindi nawawala lagi ang evolution. Charles Darwin and all those theories, teachers should be very familiar with that. Siyempre, kung merong related to anatomy, dapat alam natin ang anatomy and physiology, the functions and the parts of the human body. Okay, hindi mawawala yon. And ecology, chemistry. Right, it's really a very rich area of the test. There will be, expect physics there. I mean, in sciences in general, okay? That's sciences in general. Physics, chemistry, all right? Even earth science will be part of this. Okay. Now, in the area of sciences, you would have to be very rich with your bioscience, your physics, the chemistry, and all those related to sciences in general. Now, part of, as we go towards the last part, we'll talk about social science. Siyempre, kung social science, dapat alam na alam ng teacher ang Philippine government. The Philippine government, hindi mawawala yan, the Constitution. Okay, you should be very familiar with those. Also, the types of government. What types of government do we have? You have to be familiar with that. The types of the different branches of government, the executive, legislative, the judicial branches of government. Of course, papasok dito ang history. Okay, the history in general, Philippine history, okay, the periods in Philippine history. At hindi mawawala ang heroes. Okay, the heroes of our history. Siyempre, hindi mo, ang importante dyan will be Rizal, Bonifacio, and the other heroes you can find in the textbook of history. Economics will be part of this. Okay, economics. Papasok din ang cooperatives, culture, society in general. It will be there in the board exam. Okay, the works of Rizal, the biography of Rizal, and other traits of the Filipino people, as a people, as a culture, as a society. And lastly, for social science, will be discussions on humanities, art appreciation. Okay, because teachers should really be able to facilitate the learning and appreciation of the arts, including, of course, philosophy and even psychology. The human behavior. All right. And last but not the least, there is also an added element of the ICT. ICT, the information, communication, technology, the use of computers, digital transformation, digitization, the fourth industrial revolution, all this technology we use for blended learning, etc. Although the most of that part will be found in the professional education. There should be some terminologies you have to be familiar with, like what URL means, what USB means, do you know what search engine is, Google, social network, apps. They even ask about what is a modem, what are all of these? What's the meaning of the triple W dot and the Facebook, social media, etc. That's in the language of the ICT. It's really how you have the functional knowledge for the use. And of course, the most important element of ICT will be the new intelligence that we're looking at humans, and that's the digital intelligence. I want you to appreciate all of this and to put summary into this discussion. Okay, a teacher should be able to have the content. The content knowledge will come from general education. The pedagogical knowledge will go to the professional education part. And therefore, if you're preparing for the board, you will not only enrich your English and the use, the thinking, the writing, and the speaking English, the literature, you're familiar with local and international, the works of the masters, Shakespeare and the like. You will not only be good with Filipino, which is not actually Tagalog, but remember the mother tongue-based multilingual education. That's why we have to strengthen in this. Wika, panitikan, masining na pananalay, pamamahayag. It's how you communicate more in a very artistic form, in a scientific form. That's why even research is part of Filipino. Mathematics, to test your critical thinking, your ability to perform all of this, financial literacy, all of this, converting peso to dollars, given the conversion rates, all of those, especially now that the teacher's exam is becoming more functional than ever. Of course, when you speak of science, a big chunk of the biological sciences, from the cell to the ecosystem, you have to be familiar with physics and chemistry and earth sciences even included. In social science, it's not only the government, the society, the branches of government, the basis of that government, which is the Philippine Constitution, the culture, and the way people think, and that psychology, the way people see perspectives, that's philosophy, history, how are we groomed to be who we are today based on the history that we have had in the past, and the story of our heroes, specifically Rizal. You have to be very familiar with it. Humanities, the appreciation of the arts, and economics, because we're social beings. We have to learn how to operate in that social context. If you're a teacher, if you're wanting to become a teacher, and you don't have this content listed right here behind me, then you may not deserve to become a teacher. If you're a teacher who speaks with full of grammatical errors and grammatical flaws, I would doubt if you can really teach. If you're a teacher who cannot compute the grades of your students, that's going to be a problem. If you're a teacher who do not understand the psychology of the child and the psychology of the society where the child evolves, then you might be in big trouble. So, even if this general education is only, what, 40% of the elementary education teachers and 20% of the professional education teachers, don't forget, it will make sense if you know all of these. You don't have to be the new Ernie Baron, or you don't have to be knowledgeable of everything, but at least focus on the essentials. Because here the teachers are generalists. They should be able to know what needs to, what you need to be in that classroom. And the warning is, if you don't have a very comprehensive knowledge about all of these, you will be humiliated when a simple child asks in front of everyone else in the classroom a question and a teacher would just say, I don't know. And at this point in time, you have to prepare yourself so that not only because teachers should know everything, but teachers should know at least the basics of them all. And that's the competency being checked by the general education component of the licensure education, a licensure exam for teachers and for educators. Okay, in the next part, and you have to find this here in this channel. And by the way, don't forget to subscribe to this channel because I will be providing you more inputs on how you will navigate not only the board exam, but your professional life, your professional career, because it only begins when you get that license. It's just the beginning of life. Don't forget to be lifelong learners. Subscribe to my channel. The next part of this will be the professional education, and I look forward to seeing you there. Don't miss the other content of this channel. God bless you. Keep safe.
Bigyan mo sila. Bigyan mo mga paitan sila. Sino? Yung matalisan na yung sa akin, yung matalisan.
Kuhan ka? Luto ko papaitan?
Ha?
Luto ko?
Dinil ko no.
Ha?
Dilan ko na ako.
Isyo, malisa. Ah, yung luto na?
Luto na.
Ano ka?
Ako mapakulo na nun.
Mabasa ako, ito mag-deal sa naman ako kanina ni.
Oo.
Luto ko pa niya. Ako nagluto niya.
Akin talaga ilaw yan. Sa harap ko mo. Hindi kasi talaga ilaw yan. Hindi mo tinil ko niya.
Wala lang, wala kami nag-aircon. Wala kami nag-aircon.
Mamot yan lang niya. Dahil po.
Mahabot di.
Mamot yan. Kamat.
Taw-taw. Laki naman na. Bakit mo kako na, kain na pa ako natin sa situlaw pa niya. Sulit-sulitan. Ikaw nakakaw?
Sumay tao rin din.
Ha?
Mga tao rin din.
Nuno?
Iya tao.
Ha?
Pagkasin. Super.
Pangalan na ako, Juan. Pangalan na ako, magluto ka. Lamig na naman. Mukhang hindi na naman ito maligo bukas ah. Schedule na yan eh.